She was the most beloved grandma of Great Britain. Well, maybe even of the whole world. It's okay not to know about somebody from the prime ministers, but it is impossible not to know about the daughter of George VI. When she was born, no one could have thought that she would be the future queen, but as it turned out, she was destined to become the longest reigning and oldest monarch in British history. There were ups and downs in the life of Elizabeth II, and today, on the Biographer channel, we will tell you about the most interesting facts about her life. Why were some prime ministers afraid of meeting her? Did her husband really cheat on the queen? And is it true that the Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was born on April 21, 1926 in London's Mayfair on Bruton Street in the family of Prince Albert, Duke of York, and his wife, the Duchess of York. At that time, her grandfather, George V, sat upon the throne. He loved his granddaughter very much. The girl was named after her mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, as well as Queen Alexandra, her paternal great-grandmother, and Queen Mary, her grandmother. In the family, the heiress was affectionately called Lilibeth. That name appeared because in childhood, the little princess could not pronounce her full name, but pronounced it in her own manner. When she was young, Elizabeth often signed letters using Lilibeth. So, in one of the letters of thanks to Grandma Mary, she wrote, "Darling Granny, thank you very much for the lovely doll's house. I do love it, and I have unpacked the dining room and the hall. Love, from Lilibeth." As the king's granddaughter in the male line, she received the title of British Princess and was called Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth of York. At the time of her birth, she was destined for the carefree life of a member of the royal family, and no one expected that she would become a queen. Elizabeth ranked third in the order of succession after her uncle Edward, Prince of Wales, and fathered the Duke of York, younger brother, the Prince of Wales. But fate had its own plans for Elizabeth. In 1936, George V died, and the throne passed to Edward VIII. But for the love of a twice-divorced American woman named Wallis Simpson, Edward abdicated the throne. And after that, one of the most scandalous affairs of the 20th century brought Lilibeth's father Albert, the future George VI, to the royal throne. And maybe it was for the best, because later it turned out that Edward showed sympathy for Hitler, and even went with his wife to visit him in Germany. That's how it turned out that at the age of 10, Princess Elizabeth suddenly found herself first in line to the throne. Lilibeth grew up reserved, shy, and thoughtful. According to the memoirs of her cousin, Margaret Rhodes, she was, quote, a cheerful little girl, but basically prudent and well-mannered. So, she will be well-mannered and always restrain her emotions in society throughout her life. But this was what will help her become famous as one of the most trustworthy monarchs of Britain. Winston Churchill described Elizabeth when she was 2 as a character. She has an air of authority and reflectiveness astonishing in an infant. And how will you describe Elizabeth II? Be sure to share your opinion about the Queen in the comments. We read everything, and the most interesting ones. The future queen received a good home education with a humanitarian bias. In addition to the usual school subjects, she was taught economics, law, and constitutional law. The program also necessarily included music classes, dancing, and horse riding lessons. On her 4th birthday, little Elizabeth was given a pony. Those lessons will still instill in the girl's soul a great love for horses for a lifetime. She will grow up to be a passionate horsewoman, will keep race horses, often attend horse races, and even Kentucky stud farms in the USA. A special pride for the young Elizabeth was the fact that she learned French on her own, which she knew at a high level. That happened due to the fact that there were a large number of governesses around the princess, some of whom were from France. George VI loved his daughters very much, but especially Elizabeth. "Lilibeth is my pride. Margaret is my joy," he liked to say. He treated her with great respect and warmth, and it was probably his faith in his, quote, dear Lilibeth, that helped her become an influential, self-confident, and persistent woman. Her father tried to raise Elizabeth as the future heir to the throne. An example of the relationship between George VI and Elizabeth can be a letter written by him years later. "I was so proud and thrilled at having you so close to me on our long walk in Westminster Abbey. But when I handed your hand to the Archbishop, I felt I had lost something very precious. Do remember that your old home is still yours, and do come back to it as much and as often as possible." In the letter, George also talked about how he watched her grow up with pride all those years, and that he could count on her to continue his legacy as a possible ruler of England. And so it was. When the princess turned 13, the world was drawn into the Second World War. Elizabeth and her younger sister were evacuated to Windsor, and there was even talk of sending the girls to Canada. But the Queen Mother was against it. The following words are attributed to her. "The children won't go without me. I won't leave the king, and the king will never leave." At one point, the princesses, like many British children, found themselves locked in a confined space, without parents, in a state of constant anxiety. They spent most of the war years there, and the only outlet for the girls were the dress-up games and pantomimes that they arranged with the children of the royal staff on Christmas Eve. "We went for a weekend and stayed for 5 years," they recalled. In 1940, Elizabeth took her first steps towards future rule. Her debut radio address during the BBC Children's Hour, in which she addressed the evacuated children, trying to support them. In a calm tone, the young princess delivered her inspiring speech.
"Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all."
In that way, the 14-year-old princess won a wave of British subjects touched by her act. In 1942, she was appointed colonel of the Grenadier Guards. That inspection of the guards was the first official public event of the princess, and soon Elizabeth persuaded her father to give her the opportunity to contribute to the victory and join the Women's Self-Defense Unit. There she trained as an ambulance driver and was known as number 230873, Lieutenant Elizabeth Windsor. That was the first time in the history of the royal family when a woman served in a military unit. And although Elizabeth's service lasted only a few months, it allowed her to look at another world, far from palace life. After the end of the war, an incident occurred that would be remembered by the princess for the rest of her life. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace to celebrate, and Princess Elizabeth and Margaret were allowed to come out and secretly join them, blending in with the public. Despite the fact that Lilibeth was very worried that she would be recognized, it did not happen. That day, she was able to feel part of something bigger. Recalling it much later, in 1985, she said,
"I remember lines of unknown people linking arms and walking down Whitehall, all of us just swept along on a tide of happiness and relief. I remember the amazement of my cousin, just back from 4.5 years in a prisoner of war camp, walking freely with his family in the friendly throng. And I also remember when someone exchanged hats with a Dutch sailor, the poor man coming along with us in order to get his cap back."
In the early 40s, she became better acquainted with Philip Mountbatten, a cadet at Royal Naval College, Dartmouth. Prince Philip was the grandson of King George I of Greece. He was pretty handsome in his youth, a tall, blue-eyed blonde man with a good sense of humor and excellent physical shape. No wonder young Lilibeth fell head over heels in love with him. They met for the first time when the young princess was only 8 years old at the wedding of his cousin, the Greek princess Marina. That time, neither Lilibeth nor Philip attached any importance to that. But then everything became different. Their first meeting at a more conscious age took place during George VI's visit with his wife and daughters to the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth. If you forgot, that was the place where the prince studied. Due to an outbreak of mumps and smallpox, the cadets who were supposed to accompany the crowned heads fell ill and were replaced by Philip. He was supposed to entertain the princesses, who were accommodated in the house of the headmaster of the college to avoid infection. The governess of the young princesses, Marion Crawford, wrote many years later in her memoirs about how Elizabeth, blushing and embarrassed, asked her cousin what he liked to eat and admired how he fell on shrimp and banana split. The correspondence, which lasted for years, turned into love. There was a photo of the young prince on her bedside table, and after Philip returned from the war in 1946 as a senior lieutenant, the young man became a frequent guest at Buckingham Palace. In 1946, Philip asked for the hand of the daughter of King George VI, but he was not enthusiastic about such a prospect. It seemed to him that the prince was an unworthy match for his daughter. That was due to the fact that Philip's father was friends with Adolf Hitler, and therefore his family was overthrown and expelled from their native country. In addition, despite the regalia and blue blood, the prince did not have a significant financial condition, and his manners left much to be desired. Philip's humor was too rude, politically incorrect, and harsh. Even years later, the prince's jokes will be quietly condemned. There was another point, though not so important in monarchical circles. Elizabeth and Philip were relatives, or rather, fourth cousins. The young were united by a common great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. But the heart wants what it wants, and who dares to dictate the heart of a princess? There were rumors that the couple secretly married back in 1940, which left the monarch no choice. At the end of 1946, the prince proposed to Lilibeth. The engagement ring, made of platinum and diamonds taken from the tiara of his mother, Princess Alice, was created by the Gerard Jewelry House. According to a sketch by Philip himself, Elizabeth immediately agreed. The young man wrote in a letter dated from that year, "To have been spared in the war and seen victory, to have been given the chance to rest and to readjust myself, to have fallen in love completely and unreservedly, makes all one's personal and even the world's troubles seem small and petty." Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip were married on November 20th, 1947. The wedding was modest, by royal standards. There were only 2,000 guests. Elizabeth bought the fabric for the dress herself, using the savings. Do not forget that in the late 40s, Britain, like many other countries, was recovering from the war. The economy was in decline. She even did her makeup by herself. The wedding cake was created with the help of literally the whole world. Friendly countries sent the necessary ingredients. That day, the king, George VI, Elizabeth's father, was heard saying to guests, "I wonder if Philip knows what he is taking on. One day Lilibeth will be a queen and he will be consort. That's much harder than being a king. But I think he's the man for the job." As we've already said, George VI did not become a monarch by his own will. Albert and his wife, Queen Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, were not happy with that turn of events, especially considering that the future monarch has always had problems with the public due to self-doubt and stuttering.
A whole town of more than 100 individual palaces,
which he would work on for a very long time. George had no other way but to fulfill his duty with dignity, no matter what it cost him. The behavior of the abdicated Edward VIII, who received the title of Duke of Windsor, greatly burdened George. He said, quote, "Every monarch in history has succeeded someone who is dead, or is just about to be. My predecessors not only alive, but very much so." Elizabeth had no choice at that moment, and she understood it. Lilibeth began to be interested in politics much earlier than ordinary children, wrote their governess Marian Crawford, and was well versed in what was happening in the world. The king talked to her much more seriously and confidentially than was customary in ordinary families. He treated her as an equal. In 1943, when she was only 18 years old, Elizabeth became an official state counselor, which allowed her to represent her father during his absence from the country. Elizabeth's closer acquaintance with the monarch's duties began in 1944. She replaced George VI when he went on a trip to the fronts. And in 1947, she made her first foreign visit during a trip with her father to South Africa. In the same year, in honor of her coming of age, Elizabeth made a radio address to the Commonwealth and the Empire with the words,
"I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong."
Gradually, her father's health deteriorated. George VI had lung cancer. He was a heavy smoker. The predictions were unfavorable. Elizabeth had to be constantly present during official receptions, negotiations, and meetings as a proxy. By the beginning of 1951, Elizabeth unofficially got the duties of the monarch. Therefore, in the summer of the same year, she represented him at the Trooping the Color parade. On February 6, 1952, the king died. That news caught Elizabeth in Kenya, where she was on vacation with her husband at the Treetops Hotel, located among the branches of a huge century-old tree. But it was so customary that the monarchy cannot exist without a monarch, and therefore, when Lilibeth was only 25 years old, she was proclaimed Queen of Great Britain. She endured the news stoically, as well as the realization of the burden of responsibility that fell on her.
In a way, I didn't have an apprenticeship. My father died much too young. It was all a very sudden kind of taking on and making the best job you can.
The first few months of her reign became a period of complete mourning for her father and were spent in maximum privacy. But in the summer, she moved to Buckingham Palace and took over the routine duties of the Empress. On November 4, 1952, the Queen held her first state opening of Parliament. She was clearly not ready for that. That was confirmed by her words spoken in a session council in February of the same year. "My heart is too full for me to say more to you today than that I shall always work, as my father did throughout his reign, to uphold constitutional government and to advance the happiness and prosperity of my peoples." The official ceremony took place at Westminster Abbey on June 2, 1953. It was the first coronation of a British monarch to be broadcast on television. Millions of Britons were able to watch Lilibeth's life change.
We have resolved, by the favor and blessing of Almighty God, to celebrate the solemnity of our royal coronation.
Despite the difficulties in the post-war economy of Britain, an impressive amount was allocated for the celebration. Elizabeth wore a snow-white satin dress with embroidered emblems of Britain and the Commonwealth countries, Tudor roses, Canadian maple leaves, and Irish shamrock, as well as other flowers that have symbolic significance for Britain. At the solemn service of the crowning, which took place in Westminster Abbey, the Queen proceeded in a golden open ceremonial carriage drawn by gray horses. Since that time, she has been called Queen Elizabeth II, head of state of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, was also Queen of 15 Commonwealth states, head of the Church of England, Commander-in-Chief of the British Armed Forces, and Lord of Man. She was also Queen of South Africa from May 29, 1953 to May 31, 1961. Suddenly, Elizabeth had a huge responsibility. The royal duties obliged her to various business and non-business trips in order to consolidate her status, maintain relations with her subjects, and the authority of the British monarchy at a high level. During her reign, she proved herself to be a diplomatic and correct politician, and maintained relations with prime ministers. She always chose her words carefully, correctly, and confidently. After the ceremony in 1953 to 1954, the Queen made a 6-month tour of the Commonwealth states and British colonies, traveling by air and over land. She became the first monarch to visit Australia and New Zealand. In preparation for the visit, some New Zealand sheep were painted in red, white, and blue, the colors of the British flag. According to royal historian Kate Williams, the Queen has visited more than 60% of the 196 countries of the world. In 1957, after state visits to various European countries, she and the Duke visited Canada and the United States. In 1961, Elizabeth made the first royal British tour in the Indian subcontinent in 50 years, and later became the first reigning British monarch to visit South America and the Persian Gulf countries. There, during a trip to Nepal, she happened to participate in a rather gloomy tiger hunting action, although she did not shoot herself. The Queen also had the chance to ride an elephant and visit the local Hanuman Doka Palace in Kathmandu. In addition, in 1961, Elizabeth became the first British monarch to visit the Vatican at the audience with Pope John XXIII. She wore a black dress, which symbolized humility, piety, and avoiding vanity. The most unusual trip was considered to be her trip to Cameroon, during which she was presented with an elephant for the London Zoo, but those were not the most unusual gifts from the receiving party. Also on the list was a portrait of the Queen made of banana leaves from President of Rounds Paul Kagame, a totem pole from Canadian Indians, a silk scarf depicting bushmen hunting antelopes from Nelson Mandela. An interesting case occurred during her only visit to Russia in 1994. During the Queen's visit to St. Petersburg University, the English consul accidentally stumbled upon an old woman who told her that her granddaughter was born today, and the baby was named after the monarch. It was not known whether that was true, but the next day the Queen's representatives gathered a whole delegation with gifts and sent them to the maternity hospital. However, the hospital head didn't let the uninvited guests in. During her Silver Jubilee in 1977, she presided over a London banquet attended by the leaders of 36 Commonwealth members, toured the whole of Britain and Northern Ireland, and toured abroad in the South Pacific, Canada, and the Caribbean. Most of the trips were with diplomatic missions, which were considered successful. Interestingly, according to CNN calculations, all the monarch's travels were equivalent to circumnavigating the globe 42 times. At the same time, Elizabeth did not even have a passport. All documents were issued on her behalf, and technically she did not need it. But not everything was so rosy. The first years of her reign were not easy. Winston Churchill, who acted as her advisor, left the post. The process of decolonization began, and in the new conditions, it was important to be able to maintain influence on the former colonies while pursuing a soft and flexible policy. Elizabeth did it. The economy was in a difficult situation, and not all ministers acted for its benefit. Thus, there was a difficult period of relationship between the Queen and Margaret Thatcher. The monarch accused the Prime Minister of the consequences of a tough economic policy that led to social differentiation, reduced social costs, and an increase in the number of homeless. Of course, she accused her not directly, but she made it clear by her behavior that she did not like Margaret. Prince Philip was forced to change his religion to Anglicanism, take the anglicized version of his mother's surname, Mountbatten, and renounce the royal title to marry Elizabeth. The king gave the future son-in-law the title of Duke of Edinburgh, Earl of Merioneth, and Baron of Greenwich. During the wedding, at the altar, the future queen pronounced a traditional oath in which she promised to obey her husband, which caused an ambiguous reaction in society. And she kept her promise. Elizabeth has always been subordinate to his will in personal relations with her husband. That was complicated by the fact that, according to those close to the royal family, Philip was a typical alpha male for whom it was important to feel in charge. But his needs collided with the reality of his queen's enormous power and hurt self-esteem. Philip was forced to abandon his career and refused to serve in the army. To be honest, I would prefer to stay in the Navy, Philip once admitted, noting that he was disappointed with his retirement. Now he always has to be with his wife and officially serve her. That caused conflicts. So there was a disagreement between the spouses about the surname. Philip insisted that Elizabeth change the royal surname from the Windsors to the Mountbattens, thereby consolidating the primacy of the Battenbergs. When Elizabeth announced that it was impossible, Philip said in his heart, "I'm just a darn amoeba. I am the only person in the country who is forbidden to pass on his name to his own children." But even there she gave way to her husband, which led to an unprecedented situation for British history. They agreed that the two older children would bear the surname Windsor, and the younger ones, Mountbatten-Windsor. The case described by Lord Mountbatten was indicative. Once, during a joint trip, Philip was unnecessarily reckless at the wheel, but Elizabeth didn't even miss a word across. He had already had minor car accidents on his account, and Elizabeth knew about it, but she only sighed noisily during the next steep turn. The husband threatened her that if the sighs continued, he would drop her out of the car. When asked why she didn't protest, she replied, quote, "Philip is my husband." She shrugged. "Besides, if I say a word, he will really kick me out of the car." Irina Polyakova, candidate of historical sciences, confirms this distribution of roles. So, there are examples when Prince Philip finished the meal before Elizabeth and left the table. The spouse, respecting her husband's choice, left after him, wishing all the other guests a good evening. It was an example of patriarchal relationships in a couple. It is likely that the Queen liked her husband's strong character. In a world where everyone obeyed her will, she could want to be with a man who was stronger than herself. Lord Charteris, the monarch's former private secretary, once recalled, "Prince Philip is the only man in the world who treats the Queen simply as another human being. He's the only man who can. Strange as it may seem, I believe she values that." A friend of the royals once told biographer Sarah Bradford, "He shouts at the Queen sometimes like he shouts at other people, and she doesn't seem to mind. It's as if she thinks that's how husbands behave." Lovers often quarreled. Elizabeth's restraint did not always prevail. There were moments when Philip's intemperance embarrassed her, and she herself could say, "Oh, Philip, do shut up. You don't know what you're talking about." During their business trip to Australia, reporters even managed to film them shouting at each other. In the heat of the quarrel, the Queen threw a tennis racket at her husband. Only after noticing the photographers, the couple were able to take their emotions under control. When he shouted at her in private, she calmly ignored it. And yet, the relationship between the Queen and Philip in British society is considered a benchmark. They lived together for almost 74 years, gave birth to 4 children: Prince Charles, who was born in 1948, Princess Anne in 1950, Prince Andrew in 1960, and Prince Edward in 1964. As he grew older, the Duke softened and became more supportive. There was a rumor that the Queen and the Duke had affectionate names for each other. Unfortunately, we will never know how Elizabeth addressed her husband behind the scenes. However, Ken Lennox, a person close to the royal family, told how Philip called his wife. "He calls her Cabbage, for goodness sake," Lennox said. Can you imagine calling the Queen that? There are suggestions that this nickname is derived from the French mon petit chou, which is perceived as my dear. Its literal translation to the English sounds like my little cabbage. The biographer of the family, Robert Lacey, in 2006 confirmed that cute feature in their relationship, adding that he had heard the less cute address sausage in the direction of the Queen. After Elizabeth ascended to the throne, Philip also took a number of royal duties, including numerous ceremonial and charitable ones. He was a patron of approximately 800 organizations. He also accompanied her at all national events, state visits, annual openings of parliamentary sessions, remembrance days, anniversaries, and prayer services. But in any family, there's a skeleton in the closet. A wayward naval officer with a firm, sometimes harsh character, and a lover of entertainment did not take root well in the conservative royal palace. No one took him seriously, since he was just the husband of the Queen, who had no real power and influence in state matters. It was difficult for him to follow strict protocol, as he hated formalities. Philip preferred to carry his bag on his own, pour martinis, and communicate with people in person, rather than through notes and telegrams. That situation was difficult for Philip, and he began to seek solace from friends and in gentlemen's clubs, where, according to rumors, he behaved quite cheekily. So, in one of them, the prince acted as a waiter in a mask and wearing only a small apron on a naked body. And during international visits, there was talk about parties and entertainment with local girls, as, for example, during a 5-month trip around the Commonwealth outposts in 1956. There was also talk about Philip's numerous affairs with actresses, journalists, ballerinas, and writers. Merle Oberon, Daphne du Maurier, Katie Boyle, and others were among them. The Baltimore Sun, an American newspaper, published an article claiming that the Queen's husband was romantically involved with an unnamed woman with whom he regularly met in the apartment of a social photographer in the West End. The biographer of the royal family, Piers Brandon, commented on that situation. Meetings at the club were an opportunity for Philip to escape from the harsh reality. Both he and his friends gave the impression of ladies' men. Men were surrounded by naked dancers, and alcohol flowed like a river. But not a single confirmation was found. The letters published later, which were addressed to other women, did not contain anything hinting at an affair. In 1992, in response to such statements, Philip eventually said, "Have you ever stopped to think that for years I have never moved anywhere without a policeman accompanying me? So how the hell could I get away with anything like that?" Elizabeth reacted as befitted a queen. She didn't pay attention to any statements and fought for her marriage, regardless of whether she believed the rumors or not. Perhaps she thought that it was worth closing her eyes to the way to relax of her beloved husband. It's hard to say. But in 1997, on the anniversary of their golden wedding, she said, quote, "All these years, he has been and remains my mainstay." Philip, on the other hand, shares his own recipe for a happy relationship, possibly hinting at the real state of affairs. I think the main lesson that we have learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. It may not be quite so important when things are going well, but it is absolutely vital when the going gets difficult. You can take it as from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance in abundance. The end of the XX century was marked by an unprecedented decline in the prestige of the monarchy in the country. There was a threat to the existence of the very institution of the British monarchy. In 1992, due to new economic troubles, public indignation about the lifestyle of the royal family began. That made the Queen pay taxes on her personal income, although she was exempt from it. In addition, Elizabeth will have to save the reputation of her family several more times after the showdown of her heirs with matters of the heart. Her children and grandchildren added a lot of trouble. Thus, the situation with the unhappy marriage of Elizabeth's son, Prince Charles, and Lady Diana Spencer was difficult, even before they met. The prince had a romance with Camilla Parker Bowles. He could not marry her because of the unsuitable image of a party girl in a lower social status. Therefore, the couple soon broke up. The royal family believed that the crown prince should choose a more suitable woman. According to royal biographers, Elizabeth has always shown favor to Diana as a potential daughter-in-law. As biographer Ingrid Seward wrote in 2001, the Queen, quote, never directly addressed the issue of her son's marriage, but she made it clear with all her appearance that she approved of Diana's candidacy. The engagement was announced in 1981. There was a theory that Charles was made to take the next step by his father, Philip, putting pressure on his son. He said that it was time for him to, quote, do the right thing for his country and family. Moreover, Charles was under a lot of pressure from the family as he had a reputation as an enviable bachelor and womanizer. The Queen had high hopes for her new daughter-in-law and considered her a breath of fresh air for the royal family. But after marrying Diana, Charles continued to communicate with Camilla. Relations with Diana deteriorated, and even two sons, William and Harry, did not keep the marriage. Both Diana and Charles began to have affairs on the side, which the newspapers relished with pleasure. The Queen tried to support her daughter-in-law. According to close sources, she received her after hours without prior arrangement, listening for hours about the grief of a young girl. Diana has never been rejected, even during Elizabeth's busy schedule. At first, the Queen tolerated those unscheduled visits. Diana usually left her in a great mood, recalled one of Elizabeth II's employees. In 1992, a scandalous transcript of a conversation between Charles and Camilla was published, which contained a number of intimate details. The prince even mentioned that he would like to turn into a means of female intimate hygiene in order to permanently settle in the trousers of his chosen one. The royal family was shocked. The Queen insisted on the divorce of Diana and her son in 1996. Part of British society was critical of her position at that time, but despite the fact that it went against tradition in their situation, the monarch considered an official divorce better than the constant discussions of the royal court. Diana herself added fuel to the fire by giving a scandalous interview that undermined the support of the royal family, which was considered calculating and insensitive.
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts, but I don't see myself being queen of this country.
Criticism intensified further after Diana's death in 1997, especially after Elizabeth initially refused to allow the national flag to fly over Buckingham Palace. In addition, indignation was caused by the Queen's decision not to take her grandchildren, young Prince William and Prince Harry, to London when the British said goodbye to their mother. Later, the Queen's daughter, Anna, would intercede for her mother's decision, explaining that she cared about the boys. I think that my mother did exactly the right thing. It's absolutely extraordinary that any right-minded thinking parent should believe there would have been an alternative to bring those children down here to London and all that hoo-ha. I just don't know how you think that could have been the better thing to do. Anna herself also surprised the public by marrying an ordinary man, Olympic equestrian champion Mark Phillips. Members of the royal family treated that union ambiguously, as did the Queen. Anna could not marry her horse, and therefore chose Mark. Royal biographer Kitty Kelly quoted Prince Charles. The marriage turned out to be unhappy. Rumors began to spread that both Anna and Mark had a relationship on the side, but the real scandal arose when intimate letters by one of the servants, Timothy Lawrence, an officer of the British Navy, to the princess were found. Later, Anna divorced her husband, with whom she has 2 children, son Peter and daughter Zara, and married Lawrence. The Queen's second son, Prince Andrew, also had problems in his marriage. He broke up with his wife Sarah Ferguson after she was spotted in the company of other men and allegedly caught exhibiting inappropriate behavior. As luck would have it, all 3 divorces happened in the same year, 1992. Despite all her restraint, in a public speech on November 24th, Elizabeth admitted that it had been a difficult year.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure.
But Elizabeth had to deal with not only intra-family vicissitudes. In 2012, Prince Harry got naked while playing strip billiards at a private party in Las Vegas, and someone leaked the photos to The Sun. And in 2019, Prince Andrew has already distinguished himself. He was accused of sexual assault, so Virginia Joffrey sued him, claiming that Andrew had sex with her 3 times under the compulsion of a third person when the girl was only 17 years old. Despite the fact that Andrew denied those accusations, he was made to withdraw his royal powers and pay the woman a considerable amount of compensation. After the scandal broke out, the Queen deprived her son of military ranks, title, and royal patronage to make amends. It was obviously a very difficult decision for Elizabeth. The Queen's 3rd child was considered her favorite. Biographers wrote that she really wanted that child. When she gave birth to a son 10 years after her daughter Anna's birth, she even took 18 months of maternity leave to care for him. That was very different from her approach to motherhood, because she was able not to see the older 2 children for months. Elizabeth taught Andrew the alphabet, took him to school, attended sports matches, always supported and defended him. She was able to pay more attention to him, and Andrew was someone she had a special closeness with, shared royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. But maternal love could not protect the Duke of York from the duties that the Queen must fulfill. The situation around the marriage of Elizabeth's grandson, Harry and Meghan Markle, has become no less scandalous. According to rumors, the newly minted Duchess of Sussex was not taken by the royal family. Later, in an interview with Oprah, she would tell that she was bullied by a new family, especially racially motivated. Harry confirmed her words, clarifying that during the couple's first pregnancy, some members of the royal family expressed concern about the skin color of their unborn child. Elizabeth reacted as usual, restrained and gentle.
We see our own children and their families embrace the roles, traditions, and values that mean so much to us, as these are passed from one generation to the next, sometimes being updated for changing times. I see it in my own family, and it is a source of great happiness.
In an official statement, the royal family said, "The whole family is saddened to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. Harry, Meghan, and Archie will always be much-loved family members." Royal power is a nominal matter. This is how many perceive the parliamentary monarchy that currently exists in Britain. The king or queen performs representative and ceremonial functions, formally having no real authority in the administration of the country. They have some privileges, but the legislative, executive, and judicial power of the sovereign is limited to the cabinet of ministers, and the prime minister is most often appointed by the chairman of the party who wins the elections. In fact, the monarch is able to have much more influence than it might seem. He or she is the source of justice and honor in the country. All government officials are appointed in his or her name. No bill will become law without the approval of the queen or king. Moreover, the declaration of peace or war can only be made on behalf of the monarch, and much in Britain is focused on the figure of the queen or king and is done on his or her behalf. This is the only person who is a symbol of the events that are taking place in the country for many citizens. The monarch has the opportunity to directly influence people's emotions, and the state, as you know, is exactly people. Therefore, it is not surprising that many Britons perceive Queen Elizabeth II as a sacred symbol in itself. The Queen's face, as a symbol of the monarchy, is used as an image on banknotes, coins, postage stamps, and stamps. Although many people understand that the Queen is also a human, and all people have their weaknesses and negative sides, her ability to control her emotions, a responsible approach to her work, created a positive image for her. And it was the combination of tradition and innovation that helped her gain popularity among the people. According to Elizabeth's personal rating, 90% of Britons were satisfied with how she coped with her role. You could not hear from her a direct and cardinal opinion about something political. She always adhered to neutrality, as it should be. Elizabeth's upbringing suggested that one should behave with dignity in any situation, even in one where it is not very comfortable. Instead of strong expressions and unambiguous actions, the royal family uses a secret language of symbols and gestures to communicate. So, in order not to interrupt the annoying interlocutor and end the conversation with him, she showed the assistants a special gesture. Most often, it was shifting the handbag from one hand to the other. When the situation required an immediate solution, she twisted the wedding ring on her finger. In such a situation, the assistant distracted the interlocutor and the queen could switch to another person. If she put her handbag on the table, it meant that Elizabeth was going to leave the room in 5 minutes. Accessory on the floor means that Elizabeth is clearly tired, in which case a maid of honor will certainly approach her and say that the fictional Archbishop of Canterbury is waiting for the queen. No less important was the color and the clothes of the royal family. So, on the eve of Brexit, Elizabeth came in a blue suit decorated with yellow flowers, which could mean association with the European Union. Thus, the Queen could express her disagreement with the withdrawal from the EU. In addition, she often appeared in blue clothes in 2020, like other members of the royal family. In that way, they expressed solidarity with the doctors during the fight against the coronavirus. In general, Elizabeth's love for clothes of bright neon colors is well known, and it was not so much for love but for practicality. The Queen was easy to spot in a crowd. "I will never be able to wear beige because then no one will recognize me." Royal biographer Robert Hardman quoted Elizabeth II as saying, For the same purpose, she took with her only transparent umbrellas, the edges of which correspond to the colors of the selected outfits. Another constant attribute of the Queen's appearance was a hat. Surprisingly, you are unlikely to find photos in which Elizabeth is wearing the same hat on different trips, and all because she had more than 5,000 hats in her wardrobe, and she managed to take out in public each of them. Every hat was made to order and was selected for the monarch's wardrobe in a specific occasion. Elizabeth has always taken her work seriously. She was absent from the annual opening of Parliament only twice, in 1959 and 1963, when she was waiting for the birth of her sons. During her record-breaking reign, 16 British prime ministers have been in office, and she tried to treat everyone with equal respect. In addition, Elizabeth II saw 15 U.S. presidents, 16 British prime ministers, and 7 popes. Elizabeth understood that the world was changing rapidly. The monarch could no longer remain that closed system and was forced to democratize in order to preserve itself. Moreover, it needed to be brought into a modern course, and she took the first steps for that. On December 25, 1957, Elizabeth II, for the first time in history, addressed her subjects with a Christmas greeting via television, and in 1970, she allowed the broadcast of family life. In 2016, the Queen, along with her eldest son Charles, starred in a BBC documentary, commenting on family chronicles. Elizabeth has been advocating for women's rights for many years. During her reign, women received more and more opportunities and rights, abortions and divorces, greater protection of labor rights, and political representation. The status of LGBT communities has also changed, and the constant influx of migrants has forced Britain to become more multicultural and tolerant. In addition, Elizabeth is known for her love of innovation. In 1976, she sent her first email from a computer at a British army base. How many people at that time could brag about that? In 1997, the Queen launched the first ever website of the British monarchy. To keep up with the times, she also mastered modern social networks. So in 2014, the Queen sent her first tweet from the @BritishMonarchy account. It read, "It is a pleasure to open the Information Age exhibition today at the @Science Museum, and I hope people will enjoy visiting. Elizabeth R." But that, as you probably guessed, Elizabeth herself was standing backstage and did not jump. But participating in such a stunt was a very brave and witty act for a representative of a conservative monarchy. The changes in the attitude of the monarchy to the institution of marriage, which was previously unthinkable, have not been bypassed. Elizabeth allowed the dissolution of her sister's marriage in 1978 and later approved the creation of families of her heirs, Prince William and Prince Harry, with women of ignoble origin. Such gestures added nationality and modernity to the royal house. British ministers are required to meet with the Queen once a week, but they couldn't do it for show. It did not work out with Elizabeth II. She was always well informed about domestic and foreign policy issues, and therefore they had to prepare well for a meeting with her. Thus, Harold Macmillan, the third Prime Minister during the reign of the Queen, wrote in his diary that he found Elizabeth II, quote, "not only very charming, but also incredibly well informed," and was amazed by her understanding of the details. And although it is accepted that the monarch did not interfere in politics, she worked with so many prime ministers and leaders of other countries during her reign that it was difficult not to listen to her advice. So, Margaret Thatcher remembered, "Anyone who believes that such meetings are a mere formality would be greatly mistaken. The Queen takes an intense interest in every aspect of life in our country, and she brings to bear a formidable grasp of current issues and a tremendous breadth of experience." During her reign, Elizabeth was engaged in public activities, visited various places in the United Kingdom, held official ceremonies and royal receptions where she met with various politicians, entrepreneurs, scientists, and cultural figures. The Queen's schedule has always been very busy, and her every day was scheduled by the minute and by the hour, besides 7 days a week. Her only day off was at Christmas. Her work continued behind closed doors, outside the public cameras, but it remained no less important. Every morning at 9 o'clock, her personal secretary brought her a red briefcase containing documents for review and signatures. Among them were government papers, a summary of special services and intelligence, briefings of government meetings, and various information notes. Researching the documents of the red briefcase took about 3 hours a day. In addition, every day she read letters from her subjects and people from all over the world and chose about 300 that she could answer. Specially trained ladies-in-waiting helped in that matter, to whom the Queen gave instructions on how to answer. But at the same time, all letters sent to their recipients are not a standard response, but a personal appeal. In the example, you can see that the person's name, date, and signature are specified manually. According to etiquette, this is considered a sign of respect. Before the Queen's death, a schoolboy from Ukraine was able to receive one of those letters. The boy is very fond of the person of Elizabeth II. He studied her biography, drew portraits, one of which he sent to the monarch in honor of her 70th anniversary of her reign. The touching act was not ignored, and on August 24th, the student received an answer that he never dreamed of. During breakfast, which took place around 9 o'clock in the morning, the Queen was looking through the latest newspapers with the latest current news. Viewing newspapers was not only the goal of keeping abreast of events in the country and in the world. The royal family is very sensitive about what is written about them and what photos are published. This is a matter of reputation, and as we remember, this was the most important thing for Elizabeth. According to interviews with former chefs of the monarch, her breakfast was not much different from the breakfast of her subjects. Cornflakes with a couple spoonfuls of dried fruits, boiled egg, toast with jam, and tea with milk. They also say that Elizabeth was very fond of raspberries since childhood. After that, there was a mandatory audience with ministers and ambassadors, a meeting with private secretaries to discuss daily affairs and plan the royal schedule for the near future. Over the long years of Elizabeth II's reign, she held countless numbers of such meetings. I worked for Her Majesty for 46 years, and every time I was amazed at her amazing ability to maintain complete neutrality, even if her counterpart turned out to be her political opponent, says her former assistant, Sir Michael Oswald. The dedication to her work and her subjects was manifested in all its scope. She presented 380,630 honors and awards, conducted 459 dedications, gave royal assent to 3,135 acts of parliament, made 251 official foreign visits to 128 different countries, and gave 88 state banquets during her reign. Her Majesty has always tried to keep a balance between work and personal life. Therefore, she tried to arrange lunches and dinners with family members, politicians, and celebrities. So she managed to get information not only from official sources, but also from unofficial ones. "I want to show that the crown is not just an abstract symbol of our unity," she said, "but a personal and living connection between you and me." In the last years of Elizabeth's reign, she appeared less and less in public. It was understandable because of her age. The Queen began to gradually reduce her official duties, transferring them to her son Charles. The list of duties gradually expanded, starting with 13 items, from the formal appointment of the Prime Minister and participation in the opening of new sessions of Parliament to meetings with top officials of other states. In parallel, during that period, interest in the royal family grew as a result of the popularity of the Netflix series The Crown, which began in 2016. But the Queen did not want to slow down the pace of work. He also attended the opening of the Parliament, hosted guests and dignitaries, and was interested in events in the world in his native country. In August 2017, Philip officially retired from public life, only rarely appearing at official events. The couple rarely appeared together and were more alone together in Windsor. It also affected the fact that Philip did not really like social events too much, and by the end of his life, they became an even greater burden for him. In 2020, the prince's health deteriorated and he was hospitalized for a month due to poor health. Officially, Prince Philip received treatment for an infection and a successful procedure for a pre-existing disease. In April 2021, it became known that the Duke had died at the age of 99. Due to the existing rules of distance due to the coronavirus pandemic, Elizabeth said goodbye to her husband alone, sitting in the choir of St. George's Chapel. Photos of her isolation have spread widely online, causing public sympathy for the tragic experiences of the Queen. At the funeral, she still did not show emotions. She looked calm, and after the ceremony, she retired to Windsor Castle, where she spent all the time of mourning. Quote, "She described it as a huge void that was left in her life," Prince Andrew said, and her sadness for her husband was felt even in the Christmas performance.
But life, of course, consists of final partings as well as first meetings. And as much as I and my family miss him, I know he would want us to enjoy Christmas.
After mourning, she still tried to perform her duties, but mostly by video link. Events and meetings of that period were rather an exception to the rule. The rest of the time she spent in seclusion in Windsor. Sources reported that the head of state almost never left the residence, and if she left it, it was for walking with dogs. Her pets became an outlet for Elizabeth. The Queen was famous for her love of Corgi. The first dog of that breed appeared in her back in 1933, and since then, Her Majesty has generated a whole trend for them. Corgi was even imprinted on a coin issued in 2002 in honor of the 50th anniversary of the coronation of Elizabeth II. During her entire life, Elizabeth II had more than 30 corgis. Her first dog, Susan, became the ancestor of all royal corgis. But despite the impeccable pedigree, the Queen's dogs were not without problems. There were cases when they bit a policeman, a royal watchmaker, a driver, and an employee of the Grenadier Guards, and a palace guard. Once, while separating the fighting dogs, Elizabeth herself suffered. She had to put 3 stitches on her left arm. In the fall of 2021, they started talking about the deterioration of Elizabeth's health. She canceled several meetings, did not participate in ceremonies for Remembrance Day. At the end of October, it was reported that the Queen spent the night in the hospital, and in February 2022, it had become known that her son Charles and the monarch herself had COVID. Despite all the gloomy predictions, she still appeared at Westminster Abbey for a memorial service in honor of the anniversary of Philip's death, and on May 17th, she arrived with her youngest son Edward for the opening of a new line of the London Underground, named in her honor. In June 2022, Britain celebrated the large-scale 70th anniversary of Elizabeth on the throne. The feast lasted for 4 days and included a banner-carrying ceremony, a Thanksgiving service at St. Paul's Cathedral, a pop music concert at Buckingham Palace, and a theatrical performance that used street art, theater, music, circus, carnival, and costumes in honor of the Queen's reign. A few minutes before the start of the gala party, a video with Elizabeth's participation was broadcast on the screen in front of Buckingham Palace. In it, she starred together with Paddington Bear.
Oh dear. Perhaps you would like a marmalade sandwich. I always keep one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here.
The Queen herself was absent due to health problems. During the summer of 2022, rumors began to spread in the media that Elizabeth was leaving the political arena. She was absent from almost all events. Charles was in her place. It is likely that the Queen felt that her time was running out and tried to prepare her son. The death of the Queen will not cause a crisis in the royal family, historian Ed Owens said at the time. The symbolic transfer of power to Charles is already underway. At the end of August, doctors advised the Queen to give up long trips and travel. On September 6, 2 days before her death, Elizabeth II was still working. She accepted Boris Johnson's resignation and appointed Liz Truss as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And on September 7th, the Queen's last public statement was published, in which she offered condolences to the victims of the massacre in Saskatchewan. But she canceled several virtual meetings with the participation of ministers on the recommendations of doctors. Queen Elizabeth II died on September 8th at the age of 96. Next to Elizabeth at Balmoral Castle in Scotland were at the time the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, with his wife, Duchess of Cornwall Camilla, and his sister, Princess Anne. Later, other family members arrived at the castle. The first news of a significant deterioration in her condition appeared in the morning. That was reported to the members of the royal family and the Prime Minister. At 12:30, Buckingham Palace publicly announced that Elizabeth II was, quote, under medical supervision. The statement said, the Queen's doctors are concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended she remain under medical supervision. The Queen is in comfort and is at Balmoral. Various social networks began to spread information about the death of the monarch, referring to the fake Twitter account of The Guardian. But the family did not confirm that news. People began to gather around Balmoral and in the square near Buckingham Palace. A few hours later, at 16:30, Liz Truss received news of Elizabeth's death, and at 18:30, the Buckingham Palace press service officially announced the peaceful death of Elizabeth II. The royal family shared the tragic information on Twitter and on the website. The funeral of the monarch took place on September 19, 2022 at Westminster Abbey. About 500 heads of state, both current and former, were invited to the ceremony. The only ones who did not receive an invitation were Afghanistan, Venezuela, Syria, Belarus, Russia, and Myanmar. The Queen's body was lowered into the family crypt next to her father, mother, and sister. The heir, naturally, was Elizabeth's oldest son, Charles. who chose the throne name Charles III. Many officials received the news of the Queen's death with great respect and grief. Through a life devoted to duty, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II exemplified integrity, humility, inner strength, and outward grace. She was a constant in a changing world. She respected tradition, but embraced change. Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan Russ Mirsty said in a statement, "No doubt about it. All the time Lilibeth was on the throne, she sought to ensure that the status of the royal family was respected and exemplary."
Each day is a new beginning. I know that the only way to live my life is to try to do what is right, to take the long view, to give of my best in all that the day brings, and to put my trust in God.
Unfortunately, she did not manage to cope with everything. So around the situation with Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle, there are still various rumors. Even after the death of the Queen, the society continues to discuss the life of a couple who decided to leave the family. What made the Dukes of Sussex couple take such a drastic step? Is it true that Meghan was bullied in the royal family? And what does British society condemn them for? We talked about everything in our other video. Click on the icon and find out how Harry and Meghan live. Don't forget to like this video. There was Biographer. Thank you for being with us. Have a good one.